Alright, so I wanted to make this video because I didn't learn how to make plates for many, many years after I started learning ceramics. And so in my head, all those years, I thought plates were the hardest thing you could make. And I think a lot of other folks have that same impression. I would learn bowls and mugs and vases and even teapots, and teapots are actually really difficult, but not plates. So I finally, after many years, learned how to make plates, and there are definitely things you need to know about plates that make them a little bit more persnickety, but actually, plates are the easiest thing you can make on the potter's wheel. So there's a couple things you need to know about making plates that separate it from making bowls. The first is that plates crack really easily. So we'll go through the ways to prevent cracking, especially during the drying process. But just to let you know, my loss rate on plates is much higher than my loss rate on bowls just because of this cracking issue. The second is that you need a lot of clay. So I use about 4 pounds of clay for dinner plates. There we go. 3 pounds of clay for salad plates. And by comparison, I use 1 pound of clay for mugs. And the reason why you need so much clay is because when you're trimming, there's just a much bigger area to trim compared to making a bowl. And the other reason you need a lot of clay is because when you're wiring the plate off from the bat over such a large expanse, the wire tends to come up and leave a lot of clay on the bat. So you need more of a buffer because of that issue. We're gonna take this 4 pounds of clay and we're going to throw it.
The tools you need are simple. A wire tool, 1 or more ribs for shaping, smoothing, and compressing, a wooden modeling tool with a pointy end, a pin tool, a ruler for sizing, and then whatever your preferred trimming tools are. I still use the beginner's kit tools.
First tip is you have to use a bat when you're making plates. You can throw bowls without a bat by sort of lifting it like this after you're done and moving it, but you can't do that with a plate because it's just too floppy. So you have to use a bat. So put your bat down. One thing to keep in mind is make sure the part that you throw down is perfectly smooth and you're not throwing down anywhere you have sort of a pinch or a crack in the clay, because that'll show up on the underside of your plate, which makes trimming a lot harder. So save yourself some hassle when you're trimming by making sure the bottom of your ball is flat. I'm just gonna center this as I normally would. Again, one of the reasons why I think that plates are easy is because you don't have to be as good at centering as you do when you're making a bowl. I'm kind of centering as I'm going out. I'm using my left hand to center while I'm pushing down with my right hand. And all I'm trying to do is make a flat disc. And then here's a beginner's trick. You can just trim off the edge with your needle tool. And you can get it perfectly centered. So that's beginner's novice trick. And now this thing is very centered. You really see the effects of clay shrinkage in plates. When I first started making plates, they always came out of the glaze kiln so small. Take note of how much your clay shrinks and make your plate big enough so that when it does shrink, you have a plate you're happy with. So dinner plates are about, 10 to 11 inches. So it's got to be bigger than that. And you really feel any air bubbles pop, pop. So the number one way to prevent cracking is by compressing the bottom. Because what happens is that you often get this S-crack in the middle of your plate as it's drying. So continuously compressing the bottom really helps. So once you have this disc, making the lip is the simplest thing. I like a very simple lip that just curves up at the end. I think that's the most modern. So all I do is just take my index finger, jam it in where the clay meets the bat, and just stick my finger in. Maybe the length of my fingernail, just slightly, and then press down on the edge with my other hand and just bring this lip up. When I first had my plate lesson, I learned a more traditional lip where you have a curve up and then more of a flat edge. So I'll do that. So I'm just gonna dig in more so I can get more clay for the lip, curve it up, and then I'm gonna flatten it out. So I think this is probably more traditional. I'm gonna turn this back into my style. This tool is really helpful for digging in to clean up the bottom. You do want to wire when it's still soft, because if you wire when the clay has gotten leather hard, there's more of a chance that the wire is going to come up and you're going to take too much clay off. So it's easier to get the wire close to the bat if it's still soft. If you are using a plaster bat, you don't need to wire. So I am thinking about getting some of those, but for now I just have this. So just really as tight as you can. Stay close to the bat head. And lift up. It's 3 days later after I threw this on the wheel. It did take 3 days to dry. It's really cold in my studio right now, so it takes a really long time for stuff to dry. At day 2, I wired it off the bat and took it off the bat just because when it's on this plastic bat, it dries a lot slower on the bottom. So I put it on my plaster wedging table to dry out more. So now it's ready to trim. If you have a foam bat, then you can just place it on and not worry about it moving. I'm going to use some lugs. So I like to draw lines with a needle tool to give me a guide. So I figure out where I want my foot to be based off the curve of the lip, and then draw an outer line and an inner line. So this size plate does not need 2 feet, but I'm going to show you how to do 2 anyway. For larger plates, you may need 2 feet because it slumps in the glaze firing. So I'm just taking away the clay and going right up to my guides. Once I get the general shape, I finish it off by using a sponge. And I use the sponge to sort of pinch my feet into place. So you can either have a flat foot or a rounded foot. I prefer a rounded foot, so I pinch and use the moisture of the sponge to soften up the clay to allow me to mold it a little bit. Same thing with the inner one. Okay, so the next step is to put the stamp on the bottom, or sign your plate. I use a stamp, and I've lost many plates at this stage because I don't support the stamp. So now I always support the stamp on the other side with something flat. Sometimes I just use my fingers, but it's better if you have something that really supports the entire area of the stamp. So maybe I'll use, even just this blue rib is helpful. You just put it on the other side where the stamp is going to be. Just give it some support. So when you're pressing this in, it doesn't crack the plate. Voila. That looks really good. I'll date it. you go. Now I'm gonna let it dry. Very, very slowly. Just want to show you all the scraps that I have. Yeah. This is all the scraps for one plate. So it's a lot of clay, and if you don't have a method for recycling, it goes in the bin, or someone else recycles it and they get to take advantage of the clay you bought. So you do have to take that into consideration. I do have a pug mill, so it's really easy for me to recycle clay. All right, so the next part of the process is waiting for these plates to dry, and it can take a very, very long time. In the summer, you really have to be careful because if they dry too quickly, then you'll get cracks, either in the middle or even in the rim. And the issue isn't drying fastly, the issue is more that it dries unevenly because the rims dry much faster than the middle. So you can either take a piece of plastic and tent over your plates, if you can make it an actual tent, even better. Or you can take your plastic and just wrap around the rim and keep the middles exposed, like that. Either way is fine, but the issue is you want to keep the drying as even as possible. I cannot tell you how many plates I've lost because I've just wanted to quickly get plates into the kiln, and it's just been a loss because then I come back and there's a big S-crack. So be patient, and again, that's probably another reason why plates are seen as a little bit more advanced, because they just have a much more likelihood of cracking while they're drying. So good luck!
Hey,